Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. Today we're heading to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina on December 17, 1903, the day Orville Wright piloted the first powered, controlled, sustained flight in human history. It lasted 12 seconds. It covered 120 feet. By the standards we developed later, it was barely more than a hop. And here's what fascinates me about this moment. The Wright brothers succeeded not because they were brilliant engineers with advanced degrees, but because they were systematic problem solvers who understood that you can't skip steps. Understanding why two bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio, solved a problem that stumped better-funded, better-credentialed competitors teaches us something crucial about how innovation actually happens, why methodical beats brilliant, and how the most transformative breakthroughs often start with something so small that most people miss them entirely. Picture this. It's December 17th, 1903, a cold, windy morning at Kill Devil Hills near Kitty Hawk. Orville and Wilbur Wright have been trying for days to get their airplane, the Wright Flyer, into the air. They've invested 4 years, thousands of dollars of their own money, and countless hours solving problems that everyone said were unsolvable. At 10:35 a.m., Orville climbs into position on the Flyer. Wilbur runs alongside to steady the wing. The engine coughs to life, the propellers spin, the aircraft begins moving down the launching rail they've built. And then, at exactly 10:35 a.m., the Flyer lifts off the ground. It stays airborne for 12 seconds. It travels 120 feet, less than the wingspan of a modern Boeing 747. It lands safely. And 5 people witnessed the first time in history that human beings flew a powered aircraft. They'd done it. 2 bicycle mechanics with no college degrees, no government funding, no corporate backing. They'd accomplished what Samuel Langley at the Smithsonian Institution, with $50,000 in government money and all the resources of American science, had just failed to do 9 days earlier. Here's the thing that I always wonder about. What was going through Orville's mind during those 12 seconds? Did he understand that he was making history? Or was he just thinking about keeping the aircraft level, about not crashing, about whether the controls would respond the way they'd calculated? Let me build the clock for you, because understanding why the Wright brothers succeeded when so many others failed reveals something important about how innovation actually works and why the systematic approach beats intuition and brilliance every time. Think about it this way. In 1903, dozens of people were trying to solve the problem of powered flight. Many of them were better funded than the Wrights. Many had better credentials. Samuel Langley was the secretary of the Smithsonian and a renowned scientist. Otto Lilienthal in Germany had made over 2,000 glider flights. Octave Chanute was a respected civil engineer. These were serious, capable people with resources and knowledge. Here's what the evidence shows. They all failed because they tried to skip steps. They were trying to build a powered airplane before they understood the fundamentals of flight. It's like trying to make a clock without understanding how gears work. You might get something that looks like a clock, but it won't tell time. The Wright brothers took a different approach because their method was essentially a scientific investigation applied to a practical problem. They started with the existing knowledge. They read everything they could find about flight. the experiments, the failures, the theories. Then they tested that knowledge. They built a wind tunnel and tested over 200 wing designs. They discovered that much of the existing data about lift and drag was wrong. They didn't just accept what the experts said, they verified it themselves. Think about what they were really doing. They were breaking down an impossibly complex problem, how to build a flying machine, into more minor, solvable problems. How do you generate lift? How do you control the aircraft in 3 dimensions? How do you build a lightweight engine with enough power? How do you design propellers that actually generate thrust efficiently? One problem at a time, one test at a time, one solution at a time. When something didn't work, they didn't give up. They figured out why and tried something different. I find myself thinking about this approach because it's so different from how we often imagine innovation happening. We think of brilliant flashes of insight, lone geniuses having eureka moments. But the Wright brothers' success wasn't about brilliance, though they were smart. It was about being systematic, methodical, and unwilling to skip steps. Now here's where it gets interesting. The flight on December 17th wasn't just one flight, it was 4. After Orville's 12-second flight, they took turns. The 4th flight, with Wilbur piloting, lasted 59 seconds and covered 852 feet. By the end of the day, they'd proven that powered flight was possible and that they could control the aircraft. But here's what troubles me. Hardly anyone noticed. The press barely covered it. The Wrights sent telegrams to newspapers. Most didn't publish the story. The ones that did got the details wrong. One headline claimed they'd flown 3 miles. Scientific American was skeptical. Many people assumed it was a hoax or an exaggeration. Think about what this reveals. The most significant transportation breakthrough since the invention of the wheel, and people didn't recognize it. Why? Because it didn't look revolutionary. 12 seconds, 120 feet? That's not flying, that's barely getting off the ground. People expected a revolutionary breakthrough to look revolutionary, but revolutionary breakthroughs often start with something that looks trivial. The Wright brothers understood something crucial. You don't start by flying across the Atlantic. You start by staying in the air for 12 seconds. Then you build from there. We're still making that same mistake today. And I think this is where the story gets especially relevant for us right now. Look at how we evaluate new technologies, new innovations, new breakthroughs. We dismiss them because they don't immediately look world-changing. The first computers filled entire rooms and could barely calculate. The first automobiles were slower and less reliable than horses. The first cell phones were bricks that cost thousands of dollars. And critics pointed to these limitations as proof that the technology was impractical, that it would never amount to anything. Here's what fascinates me. The pattern repeats constantly. Revolutionary technologies start small, clunky, expensive, and limited. Then they improve. Then they improve faster. Then suddenly they're everywhere, and the old way seems impossible. Think about it. In 1903, the Wright brothers flew 120 feet. Just 66 years later, within one human lifetime, we landed on the moon. That's how fast flight technology advanced once the fundamentals were proven. But in those early years, people mocked aviation. They said humans weren't meant to fly. They said aircraft would never be practical for transportation. They said the automobile was a fad and railways would always dominate. They were looking at the 12-second flight and couldn't imagine the 747. The pattern shows up with every transformative technology. When the internet was new, people said it was a toy for academics and wouldn't be commercially valuable. When smartphones emerged, critics said nobody wanted a computer in their phone. When electric cars started appearing, people said they'd never be practical because of range and charging limitations. All of these critics made the same mistake. They evaluated the technology based on its current limitations rather than its potential trajectory. They looked at the 12-second flight and couldn't see the transatlantic crossing it would enable. Here's what the evidence from the Wright brothers tells us. The systematic approach wins. The people who solve big problems are usually not the ones with the most resources or the best credentials. They're the ones who break problems down into components, test rigorously, learn from failures, and build incrementally. I find myself thinking about this a lot because we're facing enormous challenges that require innovation: climate change, sustainable energy, healthcare, and artificial intelligence. And we often look for brilliant breakthroughs, for genius solutions, for revolutionary moments. But maybe what we actually need is more people willing to do what the Wright brothers did: systematic problem solving, rigorous testing, incremental progress, willingness to be wrong and try again. Think about the position the Wright brothers were in. They had no formal engineering training. They ran a bicycle shop. They funded their experiments with their own profits. They had no government backing, no corporate sponsors, no team of experts. By all conventional measures, they were the least likely people to solve the problem of flight. But they had something more important than credentials. They had a method, and the method worked. They didn't need to be the most intelligent people working on the problem. They just needed to be the most systematic. And here's what troubles me. We've created systems that often reward the opposite. We fund projects based on credentials and reputation rather than methodology. We invest in people who promise revolutionary breakthroughs rather than those who propose systematic approaches. We want the dramatic success story, not the methodical problem solving that actually produces. So, as we think about that cold December morning in 1903, when Orville Wright stayed in the air for 12 seconds and changed human history, I think the question for us isn't about whether we can have brilliant insights. The question is whether we're willing to do the systematic work that turns insights into reality. I admire the Wright brothers enormously, not because they were geniuses, though they were clearly intelligent, but because they understood that you build complex things by solving simple things first. Because they tested everything. Because when the existing data was wrong, they generated new data. Because they didn't let lack of credentials or funding stop them from tackling a problem everyone said was unsolvable. Here's what I see. The Wright brothers succeeded because they treated flight as a problem to be solved rather than a mystery to be unlocked. They didn't wait for inspiration. They didn't rely on intuition. They built wind tunnels and tested wing shapes. They calculated, measured, and adjusted. They made incremental progress day after day, test after test. That's not romantic. That's not how we like to imagine innovation happening. But that's how innovation actually happens. Not in flashes of brilliance, but in systematic accumulation of knowledge applied methodically to problems. Think about what we can learn from this. Whatever problem we're trying to solve, personal, professional, societal, the Wright brothers' approach works. Break it into components. Test your assumptions, learn from failures, build incrementally. Don't skip steps. And when you make progress, even if it's just 12 seconds, even if it's just 120 feet, don't dismiss it because it doesn't look revolutionary. Revolutionary breakthroughs start small. The question isn't whether it's perfect. The question is whether it's progress, whether you're building the foundation for what comes next. I always come back to this principle. Build the clock. Don't just tell people what time it is. Show them how the machinery works, how the gears turn, why the mechanisms function. That's what the Wright brothers did. They didn't just build a flying machine. They figured out the principles of controlled flight. They built the clock, and once they understood how it worked, once they'd proven it could work, the rest was just engineering. Within a few years, they were flying for hours, for miles. Within a decade, aircraft were crossing continents. Within 2 decades, aircraft were changing warfare. Within a century, aircraft connected the entire world. All because 2 bicycle mechanics were willing to spend 4 years in systematic experimentation to achieve 12 seconds of flight that most people didn't even notice. The great philosopher George Santayana once wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And here's why that matters today. The Wright brothers taught us that revolutionary breakthroughs start small, that systematic methodology beats brilliant intuition, that credentials matter less than rigor, and that transformative innovations often look trivial at first. Yet we keep dismissing new technologies because they're not immediately perfect. We keep funding based on credentials rather than methodology. And we keep waiting for revolutionary breakthroughs instead of building them systematically. We see electric cars with limited range and say they'll never work, forgetting that the Wright Flyer only flew 120 feet. We see early AI making mistakes and declare it useless, forgetting that the first computers couldn't match a calculator. Suppose we cannot remember that the most transformative technologies in history started with 12-second flights and room-sized computers. In that case, we're condemned to miss the next breakthrough because we're looking for perfection instead of potential, for revolution instead of evolution, for genius instead of methodology. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, think about the problems you're trying to solve, whether you're being systematic or hoping for inspiration, and whether you're dismissing breakthroughs because they don't look revolutionary yet. Because that's what the Wright brothers teach us, not just about flying, but about how innovation actually happens when you're willing to build the clock. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, then please tell a friend. I hope you will join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.